Today's show is sponsored by Do It. Cloud spend is just the surface. What really matters is how it drives performance, reliability, and speed to market. Do It Cloud Intelligence aligns every dollar to the intent of the workloads. Do It is trusted by companies like Fiverr, HackerRank, Current, and Superbet. Do It helps teams go beyond dashboards, surfacing hidden inefficiencies, resolving incidents faster, and aligning cloud operations with business priorities. One platform, unified signals, better outcomes across engineering and finance. Visit doit.com, that's DOIT.com, to unlock intent-aware FinOps at scale. Do It Cloud Intelligence.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody's doing well. Another weekend perspective on tap with you, and I'll apologize up front. This is probably the latest I have ever recorded a weekend perspective in terms of, time. It is still got a little bit of time left on Sunday here, but usually get these out much earlier. It has been a crazy hectic week in terms of travel. Had some weird hiccups along the way, and next week apparently is going to be even more hectic, but I want to get these out to folks. I'm a big believer, as we have over the last 14 years, in trying to be consistent in getting the shows out on the day that we're supposed to get them out and actually getting shows out every week. So appreciate y'all bearing with us, getting this one out a little bit late. Want to talk about, I feel like, there was a while where we were kind of not really talking about cloud. It was kind of a lot of AI with a very, very small amount of cloud. I do feel like over the last, a couple of weeks, couple of months, maybe a couple of months or so, I don't know the cloud has become, talked about as much, but I do feel like there is sort of a trend or a reshaping or a beginning of maybe like a second era of cloud that's starting to come along. And partially that's, due to a number of factors. But I kind of want to start to dig into that, kind of put a stake in the ground, August 2025. Maybe we're beginning to get into kind of a second phase of what cloud looks like. So I want to dig into that. And again, apologize if the audio quality is just slightly off. I'm recording this not in the massive studios, but in a hotel just outside of the Atlanta airport. So anyways, we'll get to that right after the break. Today's show is sponsored by Vasion Print. Technology should drive your business, not slow it down. But legacy print systems are a resource suck. Don't waste time and money managing print when there's a solution. Vasion Print, formerly known as Printer Logic. Eliminate resource-intensive print servers and make the switch to an intuitive, cloud-native solution that makes printing effortless for IT teams and end users. Reduce attack surfaces and secure your environment while enjoying cloud-native flexibility that's easily supported in a hybrid workforce. It's not a patch or a fix. It's a truly seamless solution for print. See for yourself by scheduling a demo at vasion.com. That's VASION.com. And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to dig into kind of, a little bit of a, putting a stake in the ground, a little bit of starting a new conversation, and a little bit of maybe turning a page on, the last decade and a half of kind of what became cloud computing, what was new about it, what excited us to do this for so long. And then, are there some new things on the horizon, not just sort of features or, earnings of a cloud provider or something along those lines, but some things that might be sort of signaling to us that, we're starting to reach a new phase of cloud. And there's some things that might be very different this time around, or at least for the second phase. And so I kind of want to dig into that in a little more detail. I don't know that the show is going to be very, very long because I feel like it's a sort of a starting point. I don't know that I have a fully formed thesis of what this is going to look like, but we're kind of, adapting to it as we go along. So, I made a list of, things that were kind of very, very important for Cloud 1.0. Not like, hey, AWS launch or Salesforce launch or something like that, but kind of characteristics of Cloud 1.0 that were just very, very different than what we had seen, in the past, the previous sort of 15, 20 years of IT and technology and those things. And then made a list of, sort of what I'll call Cloud 2.0, and really kind of hate when people do that 2.0 or sort of numbering and naming types of things for eras, but don't have a better name for it right now. So just kind of calling it Cloud 2.0 for now. So kind of want to look at those, compare and contrast them, and see if folks have any other ideas about what they're seeing as this space evolves. So as I went through my Cloud 1.0 list, a bunch of different stuff I had put down. First, I think one of the biggest things was, folks like Amazon, but obviously, or AWS and others, beginning to create on-demand services. right? This was, very much the IT organization can't keep up with the pace of business. We want to be able to experiment. We want to be able to have different economics, and just the fundamental ability to bring on-demand services. I want compute as an API call. I want storage as an API call, or a database as an API call. We're revolutionary, right? They don't feel revolutionary necessarily anymore, but you go back to 2006, 2007, 2010. These were concepts that just didn't exist within IT, and they filled a huge gap in what was happening in terms of things were changing, mobile was changing, the internet was changing, and so forth. To start going through the rest, more and more on the list, we saw a lot of OSS innovation that moved into the cloud, right? So we saw, we talked about, the interest rates being, near zero. We saw just a ton of VC investment from, 2010 to 2020. A ton of that ended up in the public cloud. So there was, not just innovation coming from, say, the hyperscale cloud providers or, regional providers, but there was a ton of innovation happening in open source that eventually became services within the cloud. So, again, that was a huge thing. We saw affordable infrastructure being at the core of this, and I highlight this because obviously, as we get into AI being a more prevalent workload, that's not necessarily the case today. So, we saw a ton of competition in the infrastructure space around what could be provided, what could be delivered. We saw affordability and price coming down. So that was a big thing. The economics of cloud continued to get somewhat better year over year, and it was a business that you could make profitable, for what we did. Now, flip side of that is we didn't necessarily see the cloud providers themselves building a lot of applications, right? They were more or less content to build a bunch of building blocks and to build things that would live underneath applications, maybe all the way up to the database layer and queuing and so forth, but not really sort of first-party applications. Now, we'll see if that changes as we get into sort of Cloud 2.0 and more AI-centric and so forth, but saw that quite a bit. We often saw that the cloud providers that were delivering these services were sort of their first and best customer. So whether that was Amazon being the first and best customer of AWS, or Google Cloud being able to take advantage of all the innovation that was happening in infrastructure from Google for their ads and YouTube and all those sort of things. Whether it was Azure delivering Office 365 or Xbox or other games as a huge sort of early customer of what they did, it gave them a huge foundation for doing that. We'll see how that continues forward as we see things like OpenAI running to run their own environments, or Grok, or XAI, or some of these other environments that don't necessarily have the scale of the business or an adjacent business to be their first and best customer. We didn't really see, and I don't want to say we didn't at all, but we saw very limited government involvement in the kind of the evolution of the cloud. Yes, we saw some things happen with Apple, and we saw some things happen with Google in terms of some of their more monopolistic types of businesses and some things along those lines. But as far as just the pure growth of kind of what we think of as cloud, whether that's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, to a certain extent, software as a service. Not tons and tons of sort of government interference, government regulations that were huge hindrances to that. And we'll see if that continues given the kind of the current state of the world in 2025 and certain things that have been happening over the last year, 2 years or so, that feel like there's more, whether it's government or regional intervention that'll come into play. A couple other things I'm taking a look at. We didn't necessarily, for a while there with cloud, necessarily see tons of competition. We're now seeing, obviously, more competition, but we saw periods of time in which, certain first movers had distinct advantages for long periods of time. And it was, sort of surprising that they didn't catch up as fast, but we saw that quite a bit. And then I'm sort of looking through the rest of my list. I think that hit most of it, right? Those were some of the really biggest things that we saw from a cloud perspective that I think were very defining to what they did. In terms of what shaped the economics of it, what shaped its ability to grow and expand and move into places that it wasn't before, to really offer new types of things that got people excited, that allowed them to experiment and move from experiments into production and all those types of things. Now, as I think about, kind of the beginnings of what we're starting to see with this new cloud era, sort of this cloud 2.0 and so forth, you know, while we saw on-demandness with sort of the first era of cloud, AI feels like it is sort of even more of a what I'll call now technology, right? It's not something in which you're going to buy a bunch up front. I mean, it is very much something that people, however they consume it or however they build it, kind of want results right away. And part of that is because it's at this point, at least fundamentally, the most expensive technology we've ever seen. In terms of the hardware that's required, the data scientists that are required, and so forth. And so it feels like it has much more of a immediacy to it in terms of when people want to get involved with AI and leverage it, they want to start it being valuable to them right away. So, what this leads to, we'll see. Whether it leads to more and more first-party applications being built by the people who are delivering that, right? So we've seen, OpenAI, for example, beginning to build some applications on top of what they do, but also trying to allow marketplaces. We've seen folks like Google, with Gemini and so forth. We've seen things with Copilot that are sort of first-party with Microsoft, although sort of, first-party adjacent. So that'll be sort of interesting to watch. I think it'll be very interesting, again, to think about, because of this immediacy, because of this sort of wanting things now, how much does the cloud, the cloud 2.0, especially, having more of an AI integration with it, how much more of that becomes, the vertical stacks that we saw prior to the cloud. So the Microsoft type stacks, the Oracle type stacks, the SAP type stacks, these sort of, large vertical stacks, that we'll see how that goes. I think we're moving, and we've talked about this a lot on the show, we're moving into an era of very unknown, uncertain, and possibly, in some cases, untenable economics of leveraging this new technology, right? I think we're going to see, a very different kind of set of conversations, right? With Cloud 1.0, the conversation for a long time was, the costs are going to constantly be coming down. The price of storage is going to come down over time. The price of compute is going to come down over time. And while we have begun to see some amount of price coming down from inference, coming down somewhat, it hasn't necessarily come down at a rate in which companies that are building on top of it are immediately profitable or immediately successful. So there's still quite a bit of unknown. There's still a ton of optimization that can happen around that. And so we'll see how that evolves. I think there's still very much a mindset of, I've got to have the latest and greatest, biggest models, most expensive hardware, fastest hardware. I don't want to get behind, right? It's sort of that driven by, NVIDIA and Jensen Huang and others, kind of trying to push the always latest and greatest in AI. And if you're not there, you're missing out. And unfortunately, right now, that still doesn't necessarily lend itself toward the type of economics that we saw with falling prices and increased competition, in the Cloud 1.0 era. Now, a couple of other things that I think are going to be interesting to sort of watch as this new era starts to evolve. We don't know what interest rates are going to look like around the world, right? We've seen them come up somewhat. I mean, they're not, 1970s level, but they're also not, ZIRP level, right? We're seeing, 4 and 5 and 6% interest rates in certain places around the world, in some cases more. Those types of numbers, and then, what level of uncertainty there might be with those types of numbers, are going to make it more difficult to get funding, to be able to fund these gigantic projects, to be able to know exactly how fast your return is going to look like on those things. So I think that's going to be another big thing. We don't know, at least in the near term, what kind of government involvement is going to be, whether that's tariffs and things that are being proposed by the United States, or some of the regulation that's happening in EMEA, or whether it's various types of new influence that's happening in Asia Pac and China and so forth, as they adapt to certain rules and regulations that might be imposed on them by their trading partner. So it feels like there is more uncertainty from an economic perspective. It feels like we're starting with more uncertainty from a kind of a government and regulation and just kind of maybe resetting of certain world orders that we've seen over the last, couple of decades. I think we have some unknown about open source, and I don't mean that open source doesn't play a role in this new world. I think open source has proven itself to be a very viable way to bring innovation into new markets, and I think we'll continue to see that in sort of the AI infused Cloud 2.0. But it does sort of beg the question: with so much VC money, and whether it's sovereign wealth money or VC money or bank money or other money, kind of pouring into AI specific things, how much VC money or ways for OSS projects and startups and so forth to get started that aren't AI specific, or very deeply embedded AI. Will we see nearly as much OSS innovation starting as we saw over the last decade or so? I think there's a question for that to be figured out, to be answered. To see how those funding levels happen and how broad those funding levels happen, and it may be a lull for a little while some of the AI money sort of shakes out or sort of fills the coffers, if you would, but also it might be for a bunch of smart investors or savvy investors or clever investors, they may see new opportunities to say, well, we need a new way of thinking about storage, a new way of thinking about databases, a new way of thinking about things that are part of those fundamental building blocks of Cloud 1.0, but we now need them at a price point that's 1/10 what it was previously, or 1/50th of what it was, or consumed in a completely different way than we did before. So I think that's going to be really, really interesting. And then I think the last thing that I'll throw on the list, that still feels sort of unknown at this point, but feels like it's different, is we've seen some aspects of kind of the cloud to AI era transitions happening, in which companies and certain organizations feel like or are positioning AI as really kind of an add-on to the cloud. It's just another capability that will kind of follow along as well as everything else. And then we're seeing other organizations who are taking more of an AI first or an AI native approach to what they're doing. Right, it's sort of its own separate thing. And I think this is what we often see as we go through technology transitions is some companies are building, or groups are building off of an installed base or an architecture that lends itself towards progressive add-ons. And then in other cases, people look at the problem they have, they're looking way into the future, and they go, boy, the only way to get to that next future, the one that we haven't even invented yet, the one that we haven't completely fleshed out yet how that happens, is to completely start from scratch, get back to whatever first principles might be of this new way of thinking, and start building from there, and recognize that is going to put more change on the people who might adopt it from where they are today, but it also may, as we've seen in the past, both on the positive and negative side, may lend itself towards bigger results, whether those are bigger successes or bigger failures or whatever they might be. So, I think those are some of the areas that feel like they're beginning to flesh themselves out. By no means are they well defined at this point, but it does feel like there's enough difference happening both at the economics level, at the competition level, at the investment level, the technology itself level, and so forth, to where it does feel like we're going to strike up a bunch of new conversations around this. So anyways, with that, I'm going to wrap it up kind of short and sweet, because it's getting late on Sunday. I need to get on to some things, but I did want to start the conversation with the community. I think you guys have always been great about giving us your feedback and starting to let us know what you're seeing as the world evolves from this sort of cloud era to the AI era. And as we say all the time, nothing ever goes away in the technology stack. It evolves. It sometimes doesn't take as much priority as it did previously, but cloud's not going away by any means. Maybe this is really cloud 1.1 instead of 2.0, but it does feel like that we're seeing, as it blends into this new AI era, a whole different set of things that we have to consider and adapt to and adjust to. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for telling a friend about the show. Apologies if there is a little more echo than normal on today's show. Again, I'm recording this not in the massive studios, but in a hotel room, which is not the best for audio quality, but I hope it's okay for you. Anyways, hope you're doing well. Thanks for listening. Thanks for telling a friend, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.